I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. First up, following the ANC NEC meeting focusing on the economy, the party announced government would be open to strategic equity partners for ailing SOEs. We look at the impact and implications of the ANC's decision with our expert panel. And then, the debate on climate change is arguably the most important global issue of our time. But is the proposed new Green Deal the answer? I speak to a panel of economists on whether the deal goes far enough to save the planet. And as is custom, we take a look at what's made news headlines in the weekend papers and why. The Fix starts now. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold the powerful to account and, of course, also the decision makers. We tell you why it matters and how it affects you and why you should care. Now, there appears to be an appetite for a fresh look at dealing with Eskom and other state-owned companies to ease the pressure on our sluggish economy within the governing party. At least that's what some of the pundits have interpreted it, while this follows an NEC gathering last weekend. However, is that really the case? Joining us this morning is Economist Azar Jasmine from Econometrix, as well as Business Times contributing editor Hilary Joffe and Professor Mark Swilling from Stellenbosch University, who joins us via Skype. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Professor Swilling, let me start with you. You wrote a really interesting piece in the Daily Maverick, and you, of course, spoke about the statement and that many journalists and analysts didn't look at what you called a game changer. And you said the game changer is the decision that the integrated resource plan must articulate the lowest cost option, which is, of course, for you a game changer. Can you explain why you think this is so significant?
It is significant because the debate about the integrated resource panel has been essentially about how much coal should be included. Now, what this means is the large bulk of our existing coal fleet has to be shut down by 2041, except for Medupi and Kusile. So you have to build new energy capacity for South Africa. So what is that going to be? And if you go purely on cost, that would have to be renewable energy, because renewable energy is about 60 cents a kilowatt hour over the life cycle. Coal is R1.30 and nuclear is between R1.70 and R2.80. So if you're going to go the lowest cost option, then you have to go for the scenario in the IRP which says no new coal. What we need to invest in the future up to 2050 is renewable energy. And that's really why that phrase in the NEC statement is significant. And it also reinforces the same statement that came out in the National Treasury document a couple of weeks ago, which was at that stage not policy. Now it's policy.
All right, Hilary, do you agree with Mark? Is it a really a game changer, particularly if you consider how strongly Gwede Mantashe, the minerals minister, is batting for coal?
Look, I think this is really at the center of the debate about the future generation mix, what we're going to build, and what the investment prospects are in the electricity industry. Because it touches this least cost option and the integrated resource plan, which is actually due to go to Cabinet this week.
Yes.
Much contested, hasn't been updated since 2010. This is the new version. It's two lots of issues which come into it. First of all, the President and the Sustainability Task Team at Eskom are proposing a giant climate change fund, which is part of the sort of supposed solutions to Eskom's funding problems.
Yeah.
So we're sort of getting ourselves into the cleaner energy space. And on the other hand, it bears on the IRP, which really tells us what you're going to be investing in.
Yeah.
Now, Mark is saying, and many people would say, that renewables are the least cost option, and the breakthrough, if you like, in the NEC statement is that the ANC appears to be advocating a path in which you go renewables versus coal,
yes,
which is certainly not something that Gwede Mantashe, the Minerals Minister, supports, or the union supports.
Yes.
I do think we need more of a debate about what the cost of renewables actually is.
In its totality.
In its totality.
Okay, I see Dr. Jasmine is shaking his head. Dr. Jasmine, take us through the coal of renewable energy if you add transmission costs to that process.
Well, it's precisely the things like transmission costs, but also the fact that renewable energy cannot operate all the time. It doesn't blow. The wind doesn't blow all the time. The sun doesn't always shine. So you've whole issues in terms of storage capacity and storage costs come into play. And that also adds to the complexity of the mix. The other thing that you've got to bear in mind is when you talk nuclear, the initial cost may be very high, but the subsequent cost is very, very low. Much lower than the other forms of energy supply. So there is a lot of sense in talking about a mix of all these in terms of coming to the right combination. Because countries that have embarked purely on renewable energy have come unstuck and found themselves actually ending up spending a lot more money in certain instances.
So I think one of the issues is that to have a lot of renewable energy on the grid, which is fabulous from a climate change point of view and may, in fact, on the pure generation be cheaper, you need quite smart grids.
Yeah.
You need very strong transmission grids. So we're going to need to invest a lot more in transmission to accommodate power that's coming in and out. So it's just a different kind of management of a different kind of system once you've got a real critical mass of renewable energy.
Okay, Professor Swilling, let me bring you in here. You've studied the way in which Eskom was hollowed out during the state capture years. You know the risk it poses for the entire fiscus. Can it do what Hilary and Dr. Jasmine is suggesting and not expose us to further costs?
Well, I mean, the statements that Dr. Jasmine made are wrong. So, I mean, just to note that, I mean, there are many countries that have solved the distribution problem, and we have the great advantage of being a very big country with many different climate zones. So if you have the appropriate grid, you can shift load appropriately, where it's blowing in one place, not blowing in another place, solar, etc., etc. So that problem is resolved. The question of additional costs, I mean, the latest report of the nuclear industry makes it very, very clear that this is the most expensive option, and they are saying it, nobody else. And Hilary is absolutely correct that we would have to invest very heavily in building a smart grid in order to manage a multiplicity of inputs. But when you have a multiplicity of inputs, you also have a freer market. And if you have a freer market, you're going to have a lot more innovation, and that in turn is going to trigger a lot of investments that we can't really predict now in order to deal with the challenges. So the calculations are that we're going to have to spend about 500 billion rand just on the infrastructure itself. That's going to trigger an industrialization program. It's also going to trigger a lot of investments in making the grid smarter. So I just think we need to accept that whether we like it or not, price is going to drive this. Even in the US, where you have a coal champion as a president, renewables are now equal to coal. And that's purely because of the way the market works and how price drives the best technology. I mean, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. The Stone Age ended because we found a better way.
Okay,
that's where we are now.
Well, let me bring Hilary in. Hilary, you wrote a very interesting piece in the Business Time. I'm hoping we can get it up on the screen, which goes to the heart of where the decision-making lies. And you enter the debate on the state of our economy via the mandate of the Reserve Bank. And you speak to the fact that already within the governing alliance, there is, of course, different views on what the mandate should be, and it shouldn't just be about price stability, but should include things like the development goals of the country. Now, given that that's always been the kind of push and pull tension in the alliance, do you think that unless we have that resolved, we won't be able to resolve the way in which we decide on our energy mix, what we can and can't afford, and what people think is affordable or not?
Yeah, Karima, let me make a couple of points. My column does rant about monetary policy. And one of the scary things that came out of the Reserve Bank for me this week is that our potential economic growth rate, in other words, the sort of trend growth rate, has fallen as low as 1%. In other words, we're unlikely to sustain more than 1%, which is really scary. It's well below our population growth rate, for any length of time, unless we make major reforms to the way the economy operates, to the way the SOEs operate, which I suppose is what's being debated by the NEC, by the Treasury through its paper, in government itself, which has promised a new economic strategy.
Yeah.
Monetary policy is really no solution, because all monetary policy can do, with the best will in the world, is affect sort of cyclical changes. So all these calls for monetary policy to do more with interest rates, I mean, interest rates so they could raise our growth rate to 1% or 1.5%. They're not going to get us to 3% or even 2%. So I think this debate about the mandate is it's not about the mandate, it's about where interest rates should be, and the Constitution already says the Reserve Bank is supposed to do what it does in the interests of balanced and sustainable growth. Growth is already there. But the question is, and I think that's now at the centre stage, I hope, is this debate about what are we going to do to dynamize this economy and sort its problems, not about what we're going to do about the Reserve Bank.
Absolutely. But of course, the big drain on how we get our economy going is the extent of the risk we're exposed to. And Eskom is at the center of that risk. So let's go back to that state-owned company. Dr. Jasmine, Professor Swilling was very clear. He disagrees with you on the energy mix, and he's essentially saying that you've got to come, to the real world, and that we're living in a planet with sustainable, or rather definitive or defined, resources, finite resources, and that nuclear is simply not an option, and we can't afford it.
Well, the point is that this research has shown very different outcomes in various fields, including the area of nuclear. No one can actually claim to dominate the debate and say this is the right way and this is the wrong way. Different pieces of research come out with different results.
But isn't it that people seek confirmation bias? Isn't it that if you're a nuclear proponent, you go out and you collect research that actually furthers your argument? To what extent are you interfacing with views that are different from yours and make a decision in terms of the mix that's in the national interest, instead of sector-specific interests that will obviously have a vested interest in what kind of energy mix we choose?
I think you're absolutely correct. We do need to research all of those different options. All I'm saying is that there is no one unequivocal answer to all these at all.
Okay, Professor Swilling, let me come to you. I see you are itching to get in there. Do you agree with Dr. Jasmine?
Well, just to go back to your question, forget about climate, forget about resources, only focus on the economics, and you'll get to the right answer. So an enormous amount of research has been done on this for years, and it's all embedded in the Integrated Resource Plan. It's a great document. There's 2 sets of modelers with dozens and dozens of researchers in the CSIR as well as in the Eskom planners who've both run models for years now, and they both come to the same conclusions, which is by 2050, the cheapest option is that 70% of the total amount of energy that we need is generated by renewables. That's what those models say. They're separate sets of models correlating with each other. The Finnish researchers have just done a very similar set of modeling. Many others have done all of this modeling. They all come to the same basic conclusion, which is the learning curve on renewables is going to significantly accelerate over the next couple of decades because of what's happening in the world, because of price. And so the ANC decision to go for the lowest cost option is really an extremely intelligent principle to adopt with major implications. But going back to your earlier question about Eskom as a player, before the previous CEO resigned, he said Eskom is in a death spiral. And it's in a death spiral, and what that means is you can't fix it. So the ministers that are trying to put pressure on the coal industry to lower prices is just going to worsen the death spiral. In fact, all the greenies love what the ministers are doing because that's definitely going to destroy the coal industry. So you can't fix something like that's in a death spiral. You have to completely restructure it, and you have to worry about the workers which is what the Just Transition Fund that the President talked about a couple of weeks ago. So all of this does come together in a way which is extremely interesting. It just means we have to break from our religious commitments to other forms of energy which have traditionally served us well but are no longer cost effective.
Hilary, should we leave orthodoxy?
Look, Karima, I think we took, in a way, we sort of throwing a whole lot of debates about the longer term issues into the very short term and very urgent issue of how to fix Eskom. And you can talk about strategic equity partners as the NEC does. I don't know who is going to buy those, and the Treasury does. Nobody in their right mind would buy those coal-fired power stations, those old ones. They are clapped out. Somebody need, There's no immediate solution, nor is renewable energy or any other kind of future generation. The immediate and urgent problem is how do we fix Eskom's finances and its operational issues now? And for that, some really urgent decisions need to be made by government, starting with the chief executive. So we don't even have a chief executive at Eskom.
So let's say we have a chief executive. It doesn't solve the financial death spiral that Eskom is in and also the infrastructural problems that there are. What is the equity partner going to get out of Eskom? How is that a possible solution, Hilary?
It's a longer-term solution, and the same goes for SAA and all the other state-owned companies where they're talking equity partners. You can't sell the thing unless you've done at least the basics of fixing them up, and in Eskom's case, cutting the costs and making it more efficient. That's not just about manpower, that is about the whole supply chain. And I think that government is simply not making decisions about the debt, about the operations, about the model as it is now, never mind in future.
Now, of course, we're not just talking about SOEs, but the reason we're stuck on Eskom because it impacts our efficiency and our productivity and also our competitiveness in terms of an investment destination, both for domestic investors as well as international investors. What needs to be done to Eskom so that we can actually fast-track the economy, Dr. Jasmine?
There is a basic problem with Eskom that has not yet been resolved, and it's a very difficult issue to resolve, and that is that the Eskom is not receiving cost-reflective revenue. Prices of electricity were historically suppressed for a variety of reasons, and they've never really come back up to cost-reflective levels. And so Eskom is in a very difficult situation if it can't raise enough revenue to cover the costs of actually operating. And it's not only an issue of efficiency, it's a historical legacy that it has inherited.
Professor Swilling, when people talk about historical legacies, everyone thinks that people are trying to pass the buck. To what extent is that as a real factor? But more importantly, if we are to talk about a just transition, I have yet to see one union endorse independent power producers. If we have the kind of unemployment rates that we have, how do we solve this to people who believe that this move could threaten their jobs?
Well, I mean, what Dr. Jasmine has just said is a correct description of the problem. However, if the various reports that we've been seeing are true, there is the beginnings of a solution. Eskom, no matter how you restructure it, can handle 200 billion rands worth of debt. So you have to move 250 billion rands worth of toxic debt into a separate space. Mr. Godongwana suggested that goes onto the fiscus, which is obviously extremely good for the bondholders because they get a get-out-of-jail-free card. What the President has referred to, though, and what various reports from the task team have referred to, is a special purpose vehicle into which you could put the toxic debt, and that provides leverage so that the bondholders are not let off scot-free. So there is elements of a solution beginning to emerge in terms of how to manage the debt. However, what you really need is a just transition fund, and that's exactly what the President suggested in his statement at the Climate Change Summit at the UN a couple of weeks ago. And that's a really interesting idea, because if you have 30 billion, for example, in a just transition fund provided by climate change finance, who are essentially going to who buy the carbon that gets released because of the accelerated decommissioning of the power station, That creates a just transition fund. If you look at the numbers, it's 82,000 workers, about 60% of those will retire by 2040, because on average age they're quite old. That leaves 40%, half of whom are going to remain within the coal mines and get export oriented. They need lower energy costs. They need decarbonized energy in order to expand. And the remainder get retrained. So
okay,
there is a framework for this to work.
Professor Swilling, you've made your case quite convincingly to me, certainly. Hilary, the politics is a lot more difficult to navigate, and that's always where we come unstuck. 30 seconds. Can President Ramaphosa put the different people into a room and throw down the gauntlet and say, act in the national interest?
I hope so, but I haven't seen really strong signs so far, but you never know.
Dr. Jamil?
I totally agree with Hilary. It would be a game changer if that were to occur.
All right. That's where we will have to leave it. Thank you so very much to Professor Mark Swilling from Stellenbosch University, Hilary Joffe, the contributing editor at Business Times, and of course Dr. Azar Jasmine from Econometrics. Up ahead, the much-touted global Green Deal. Does it go far enough to arrest the effects of climate change? Stay with us.